welcome it. And if you need anything, just let us know. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ellen.
And as a co-sponsor of the Center for Reflective Citizenship of this learning lunch, I want to thank everyone for coming, and I'm so grateful to see people from the School of Education, people from other units, and so thank you. I found myself in the peculiar position of being the oldest faculty member in here. Not the oldest person in here, but the oldest faculty member in here. So I get just a bit more time. And one of the things I want to mention is how grateful I am to the Chairs of Excellence program here. And for those of you who weren't here when it was founded, the UT board did it to bring internationally and nationally known scholars here to up the reputation of the system, but also to act as colleagues with regular faculty. Classify me as a regular faculty member. And I've had the privilege in the time I've been here, and I'll go in alphabetical order, of working a long time with an economics chair of excellence, a long time with a history chair of excellence, and now 4 years with a literacy chair of excellence. And that brings me to the problem. I was cognizant enough to figure out about 5 years ago that early literacy is a real problem. But I knew that I was an ignoramus about it. And any mistakes I make can't be blamed on Jim. But Jim has been an inspiration, and I can't tell you how many times we've met. I want to thank them. It's a private public, if you don't know, Chair of Excellence program, so I know I've never met the McKee family representative that is here, but thank you so much for the support that you've given. And finally, I'm really happy to say that the School of Education has a new Chair of Excellence and scholar and practitioner. So who knows, if I stay around long enough, I might be collaborating with you. So Laurie Allen, thank you.
Today, I'm going to introduce the topic that you are going to discuss. In this room, there's far more expertise than I could ever possess on this topic. Therefore, I'm not going to represent a position or a theory. I'm simply going to lay out a base within 3 questions which we will address. I don't come with answers. There's a reason our topic ends with a question mark. Early literacy. Is it a national, state, and local crisis? Is it? There are some who say it is, and some who say that there are other issues that relate to it that make it look like it is. We're going to talk about that. Now, a number of years ago, I was driving to work in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And as I was driving to work, I saw a new billboard that had just been, a new message had just been placed on one of the billboards on my way to work. And it was the picture of a chalkboard. And on the chalkboard, written in chalk on the billboard, was the following message: erase illiteracy. Read. You have a problem with that? I thought immediately, that's crazy. That's like saying erase starvation. Eat. What if you have nothing to eat? So how do you erase something like illiteracy by simply then just starting to do what you can't do? There was a national organization that was putting those billboards all over the country. That's a story I won't go into, but it was obviously a misunderstanding at its lowest level. We're going to discuss 3 questions, which we have shared with you in the invitation, and which we will give you a handout to address. To prepare for this discussion, I thought it might be helpful to provide the most basic information that led us to these questions. We simply started where most current publications seem to start these days about this topic, with the assumption that the National Reading Panel's 2008, the year 2000 report is where we should start. This is the report. I'm not kidding. It's huge. And if you can accommodate everything in this, you don't need to learn anything else. That's the assumption. So that's what we started our question. But just to set us up, very briefly, to prepare for the discussion, the report, this big report, suggests that scientifically based reading instruction incorporates the following 5 arrows. No, this is an arrow. The following 5 areas. I'm learning how to use new technology. National Reading Panel 2000, Teaching Children to Read. Original report, essential components of reading. There are 5. Fluency, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, phonics, comprehension. Now, just to make sure that we know what that is. No, I haven't figured this out yet. Phonemic awareness. Now, let me do something before we do this. I'm going to read this off the screen. Why? Because there is a principle of learning that a lot of people forget. I'm going to ask you a question. When I say cow, how many of you see in your mind a cow? Well, that's most of you. But some of you didn't raise your hand. I don't see a cow. Let me ask you the next question. Those of you who see the cow, what color is it? Shout it out.
Black and white.
Well, of course it's black and white. All right? I've done this for many years and with thousands of people in the audience, and it's almost always black and white. Why? I have no idea. What direction is it facing? Left. It's always facing left. Now, for some of you, you will see it differently, but for most of you, you will see a black and white cow facing left. Why? I don't know. Visual people have unique learning characteristics. I can hear it moo in my brain. I can hear a whole barn full of cows mooing, but I can't see any of them. Now, am I weird? No, I'm just one of a minority. Okay, when it comes to material on the screen, visual people can read it just fine, and the teacher will often say, okay, read that and then we'll have a quiz. Whereas we auditory people, we want to read it subvocally. So I'm going to read it with you so that we make sure everybody understands. Phonemic awareness. Phonemes, the smallest units making up spoken language, combine to form syllables and words. Phonemic awareness refers to the student's ability to focus on and manipulate these phonemes in spoken syllables and words. According to the National Reading Panel, teaching phonemic awareness to children significantly improves their reading more than instruction that lacks any attention to phonemic awareness. Okay, that's 1 of 5. 2, phonics. People will say, well, what's the difference between phonemic awareness and phonics? Okay, here's 3. Phonics is the relationship between the letters or letter combinations in written language and the individual sounds in spoken language. Phonics instruction teaches students how to use these relationships to read and spell words. The National Reading Panel indicated that systematic phonics instruction enhances children's success in learning to read, and it is significantly more effective than instruction that teaches little or no phonics. 3, fluency. Fluent readers are able to read orally with appropriate speed, accuracy, and proper expression. Fluency is the ability to read as well as we speak and to make sense of the text without having to stop and decode each word. The National Reading Panel's research findings concluded that guided oral reading and repeated oral reading had a significant and positive impact on word recognition, reading fluency, and comprehension in students of all ages. 4, vocabulary. Vocabulary development is closely connected to comprehension. The larger the reader's vocabulary, either oral or print, the easier it is to make sense of the text. According to the National Reading Panel, vocabulary can be learned incidentally through storybook reading or listening to others, and vocabulary should be taught both directly and indirectly. Students should be actively engaged in instruction that includes learning words before reading, repetition, and multiple exposures. Learning in such enriched context, incidental learning, and the use of computer technology. I didn't read that well. Comprehension, finally. Comprehension is the complex cognitive process readers use to understand what they have read. Vocabulary development and instruction play a critical role in comprehension. The National Reading Panel determined that young readers develop text comprehension through a variety of techniques, including answering questions, quizzes, and summarization, retelling the story. That's it. What I have to squelch is my own personal desire to talk about each one of those. Like fluency. Ooh, I would love to talk about fluency. But I won't, because I want to put these 3 questions, and we could now hand out the assignment number 2. At your table, we're going to have lunch now, by the way. But before we give you the box, I want you to identify 2 people. And they can be volunteers, or you can point them out and say, you're the one. A recorder and a reporter. The recorder is going to fill out the answers on this form. You can either have it turned, and this is all coming back to us, so it'll serve as the basis for our report. Or you can have all 4 of them and handed in, but we really want one that kind of records what everybody said, summarizes. And then the reporter is going to sit at this table when we're finished with the discussion, and I will moderate a discussion of the 3 questions and what your table concluded. Well, as I wandered about, listening to your conversations, I was inspired. As I said earlier, there's more accumulated wisdom in this group than I could ever hope to have. I hope that we can concentrate it in a report that will make a difference. You know, you've heard the term wicked problems. Problems that literally exist and we don't know how to fix them. This may be that. That's why the question mark. So we're going to go through the 3 questions and we'll just go down the panel one way and then down the other way. Or we can choose. But the audience, feel free to ask a question or add a comment anytime you want. This is a group discussion, but the panel generally focuses on the solutions or the, not solutions, the conclusions that their group came up with. Fair enough? Okay. The report, the National Reading Panel. Is it still relevant?
We did agree that it was probably missing more specific information regarding vocabulary to really be able to connect it to content and making sure our students understand the context of that. And it was important too that we felt like they were exposed appropriately, which then gets into some of the challenges and some of our suggestions. But, you know, as Dr. Ellington shared with us, and I had forgotten, it's been so long since I read the 2000 report, you know, this all came about because of the whole battle between phonics and home language.
You're leading wars.
Yes, yes. And so then it was so terrible, you know, the legislators or the Congress decided that we need to bring together outstanding literacy-minded people, research-based best practices, and come up with the research that supports that, or identify those best practices. And so that's what this report was about. So we did agree that it was still relevant.
We agree that there might be some relevance, but we've asked some questions in terms of that it might not fully recognize where students come from and the implications of that in regards to literacy. We also wondered about more information about the access to resources, especially age-appropriate books in the home, and how that might have an impact as well too. And then we also started to go into a conversation about the relationship of this report between in-school and out-of-school opportunities. You know, do we need to be considering things in terms of what's happening in the home, and when it comes to parents literacy levels in themselves, but also them feeling like they can do something.
We absolutely believe that it is still appropriate. There's really nothing that we can teach about the actual reading process that does not already fit into one of these 5 areas. However, if you all know Scarborough's rote, I wish we had a picture of that. The Scarborough's rote actually goes into additional elements like what you can know about print needs to be supported by oral language. What you know about print has to be supported by background knowledge. What you know about print has to involve, you know, knowing concepts of print. How does print work? How do you even, you know, occasionally I've worked with kindergartners who came into kindergarten who didn't know how to hold a book. So these areas are relevant, but you can even drill deeper if you look at all of the different language elements and word and world elements from Scarborough's rote. So I'd be happy to send that out.
Could you send that reference so that we can add it to the report?
It's this on steroids.
We need it.
If reading now is encountering challenges with other things, whether it's video games, whether it's iPads, whether it's, you know what I mean, other things vying for young learners' attention. And I see this as a father of 9-year-old twins and 11-year-old. You don't want to try to teach reading as punitive. Well, okay, you're grounded from your video games. You did something wrong. You're grounded from your video games for the next 3 days, but you can read. But sometimes, you know what I mean, sometimes to try to carve out that space for reading gets ever harder, especially if it's not seen as somehow punitive, that this is what they have to do and they can't be engaging in technology in some other way. Video games. My kids aren't on social media, but you know, plenty are at that age. So technology, economic status, number of parents in a household. It's a lot easier if one spouse is up reading with the kids at night while the other one is downstairs doing the dishes and cleaning up after dinner. You know what I mean? Just the time efficiency. And home environment, these three things all come together: technology, economic status, home environment. Do children read at a higher rate when there are bookshelves in the house with books? Or what about kids whose shelves don't have books on them? Just, is it kind of an absorbed part of their home environment? These are the things that we saw as challenges: technology, economics, home environment.
Okay.
How much time have we got?
The diagnosis is always easier than the prescription, isn't it?
One of the things that we were talking about was, especially for our kids who come from poverty settings, without background knowledge, without knowing, without having a rich vocabulary, without having been read to, which is where academic language comes from, then we're going to have kids who start off kindergarten behind. One of those challenges is certainly, do you choose book, if you're a poor mother, do you choose books or do you choose food? There's no question, it's Maslow's hierarchy of need. So, the background knowledge, the modeling in the home, it can be a challenge. One thing that we were really emphasizing in our group was this assumption that there is some divide between learning how to read and then reading to learn, which is a real false dichotomy. I am still learning to be a better reader of text that is unfamiliar to me. So, we're talking so much about all teachers are teachers of reading. They happen to be teaching reading through biology, at the middle school, high school level. They happen to be teaching reading through mathematics. So we've really got to end this idea that, well, these kids know how to read, they're third graders, they're doing a great job. Or even if they were doing a great job in fourth grade, that's not an inoculation against reading challenges later, because you have to continually learn to read tougher texts, more advanced, more sophisticated vocabulary and sentence structure and longer noun phrases, etc. Like I said, how much time have I got? I have to stop myself. One of the things we're really battling is that the teacher candidates that we work with at the middle and the secondary levels really don't perceive themselves as being responsible for teaching literacy. Those of us in early childhood, we know that's our primary role. We've got to teach you how to read and we have to teach you how to write. But then somewhere along the line, we sort of lose that pathway of understanding that we are teaching the whole child, whether they're in elementary, middle, or high school. If they're not reading, they can't learn science. If they're not reading, they can't do social studies. Reading in mathematics is very different than reading in social studies, which is very different than reading in language arts. So, myriad challenges.
Agreed.
We also talked a lot about socioeconomic status. What we've distilled that down to is students entering school may have varying exposure to literacy development before they start kindergarten, to what happens in the home, but also parents may not know the importance of just reading early, or might assume that once they get to school, it'll all be fine. Based on varying interest. I also this wasn't something we added, but I just so appreciate what you shared about all of us having a role as literacy educators, and as arts educators, that's my role that I play. That one of the things that I'm always trying to instill in my teacher candidates is that we all play a critical role in literacy development. what's awesome, what we bring to the arts is how we think about our access to text and what text can be. And I think that's where we have to expand who's a partner in this. It's not just on the onus of a grade level teacher or the early learning educators, it's all of us that play a role in that. And we talked a lot about parents at our table. We did talk about, because of how you framed it earlier, about is it literacy or is it another issue? We talked a lot about poverty and the impact of poverty when it comes to literacy development. And much like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you have the choice between books and food, what do you choose? And so we wondered, if you address the poverty issue, does that automatically open the door to helping with literacy, or is it important to address both so that they're both visible as issues? We also, and this is going to come into our actions, we had a very fascinating conversation about IEPs and how IEPs tend to be with students with varying abilities that need a variety of different supports. And we started wondering about how IEPs could be for all students, and maybe a way to think about IEPs as a way to think about literacy in an innovative way, perhaps. And we'll talk more about that with our action steps.
Okay. I want to add this to the point. As you were talking about the relationship between arts and reading, I remember some research that was done out of the University of New York where they were looking at the learning of the alphabet and found that the memorization of the alphabet song does not translate into the learning of the alphabet at all. So you can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G and not know the alphabet. And I just find that fascinating because I interpret that to mean, this is just personal, it's more fun to sing than it is to say the alphabet. So if you can get to the motivational part of singing, then you have to translate that somehow into the meaningful part of what you're singing.
But also to distill, what do we learn when we sing? We really build effective hearing skills, and I am not a musician. I want to say that right now. A lot of people ask me if I sing when I tell them in the arts. I'm in theater. No, I don't perform, although I am right now. But it's interesting to think about the skills we learn in some of these activities, such as singing the song. That ability to recall can help with some aspects of literacy, but the song itself doesn't teach. I mean, I still remember all the capitals of the United States because of the song from Animaniacs. If anyone remembers that, kind of dating myself. But you ask me what's the capital of Alaska, I'll be like, I have to literally go through the song to think about it. But do I really know it? It's a really interesting thing to consider.
That's fascinating. Okay.
To summarize it, what we determined was we've often worked in silos. We either feel like it's teaching literacy in just the skills of literacy, and then we just teach math, and not that we just, and then we teach math, and then we teach science, and then we teach social studies, but all of that has to be interwoven together so that literacy skills, like several mentioned, we teach that also in our math and our science and our social studies, but then also in social studies, or even our sciences, looking at those literacy skills to teach vocabulary and comprehension skills as they're reading those hard to read texts, as we oftentimes think about with science and so forth. So it's that ability to, weave the knowledge and skills among everything that we do with that background knowledge and the content that we come to the table with in order to improve all our early and emergent literacy skills.
We're going to have to integrate everything that involves literacy. Is that what you were saying? I mean, you can't separate out literacy and say, okay, we got a literacy department and we just study literacy. We're really looking at everything as it pertains to. Yeah.
One of the things I think education is doing right now is migrating away from textbooks. And as we migrated away from textbooks, we replaced the reading gap with a digital reading gap. And so one of the issues, if you want to change literacy, one of the issues is you've got to address digital issues. And in Hamilton County schools, we figured out that 17,000 homes needed Wi-Fi connections when the pandemic started. But it's not just Wi-Fi connections. It's the computer, it's the parents being able to get you online. All these things one of my grandchildren was a month into the homeschooling when the teacher said that a third of her class hadn't even gotten online yet. That's a month. I know if I started a month late, I would be in trouble. So I don't think you can address all this without some addressing of the digital issues.
All right? Which also begs the poverty issue.
It's directly related to that.
Any other comments? Okay, let's go to the last question, which seems to be the one that everybody concentrated on. What actions are possible and recommended now? What do we do now to begin to fix this problem that would yield a highly literate society?
We do need to start framing needs around a more positive rhetoric. I'm the person on campus that's like, oh, she's so positive and perky. I'm not those things. I choose to be those things. And I'm really concerned about the language of like learning loss, which is so prevalent right now because of the pandemic. And yes, there is a learning loss, but here's the thing. All of these reports are based on student performance. And that's where we're pulling our data from. It's where we're getting all of our information, and we use that information to analyze things in different ways, right? Students know how we're talking about their learning. They are so perceptive to this. And I think the first thing we can start now is still talk about the needs, but frame it in a more positive way. What can we do to grow as opposed to what we can't do? I also review a lot of grants, and when I see like the needs thing, I stop reading after I hear, here's all the problems. I want to hear solutions. So that's something I think we could all do now. Choose to be positive. There's a lot of needs here. I mean, it's critical, but I think the way we have to be motivating, because ultimately we have to motivate our students. This is what this is about. Next thing we talked about was, that personal, that relational connection. What is it about setting up mentor groups, reading buddies, just something like that in terms of bringing people from the outside in to help with students, to help really expand that partnership. And then our kind of high level action step, maybe not something we can do right now, but we are really wondering about establishing a process where all students receive an IEP in literacy.
If we aren't meeting the 0 to 3 needs, of course, I'm a big proponent of universal pre-K, but if we can't afford as a state to have universal pre-K, then let's find a way to educate all parents in talking richly about the world with their children and coaching them, going in, finding some way to coaching parents that so much can be accomplished 0 to 3, and 0 to 3 sets a child up for kindergarten success. The frightening thing is, kindergarten predicts 3rd grade success, and 3rd grade success predicts high school graduation. So it all has to start so early, and parents are the first teachers. So we need to find some way as a community, and we kept talking about community. We've got to find a way to help parents know how to be their children's first teacher. I shared a study by Sharon Newman, who worked with very low level literacy parents, some with IQs of 70, taught them how to read with their children, and their children ended up in kindergarten with the exact same skill set as any other child who had entered kindergarten. So we can coach parents into being effective first teachers for their children. If we can get them into kindergarten, either through high quality pre-K or through parent education, then we have a much greater chance of getting them on grade level by 3rd grade, which then predicts high school graduation.
It makes sense. I remember I wrote an article once called "The Community as School."
Yes.
And what I was thinking was, if you went way up high and you look down on the school, if you only see the walls of the building, that's a pretty limited view of education. Where everything that involves the community from the filling station where you get your gas to where you buy your groceries to where you go to church. All of those things are part of your education. We don't do that. We simply isolate and build walls around the educational system. But I think we're beginning to think that through. COVID has helped us do that, actually. So that's a positive. Okay.
We talked about a couple of things actually at the college level. Presumably some of these college students will then become parents to model these kinds of behaviors for their children. I'll say one thing though about the teaching aspect. Teachers reading to their students in the classroom, separating out a good 30 to 40 minutes of their day where they're sitting at a desk reading from a hard copy text even to show the value of actually reading it there. Getting their students involved in what evolves chapter by chapter, I think is I don't know how much time is left in the day for that kind of reading. Just first grade, second grade.
That amount of time in a classroom to read to students would be absolutely dreamy.
Wouldn't it be great? Yeah.
And the effects would be incredible. My husband came to a charter school where I taught once, and that evening at home he asked me, "Why were you dancing up and down the aisles?" Because I was reading Robin Hood.
Yeah.
And we were in Sherwood Forest.
Yeah.
And these were fourth grade boys. They gobbled up Pollyanna. When you said Pollyanna, I always think of reading to my boys because it was an all-boy class. And I thought, oh my God, I gotta read Pollyanna to boys. They could not wait
that's
each
great.
day.
Yeah. It's a great way to learn tone. You know what I mean? If a teacher
Yep.
reads a novel in different voices, and for students to be able to pick up on that.
Yes, becoming a character in
Yes.
role play
Yeah.
Yes.
is
Yeah.
very vital to literacy
But then that
development.
also goes to the curriculum that you're teaching. I was blessed to teach core knowledge curriculum, which has very, very rich literature. So.
This is kind of a funny little lesson in context. When I was in fourth grade, and my teacher loved books about dogs, and there were a whole bunch of dog books by a guy named Jim Kierkegaard. I don't want to say Kierkegaard, but it's something similar to that. They're probably from the 50s or 60s, but Irish setters, English setters. Well, anyway, that was the first time I'd ever heard a teacher say the word bitch. But I understood from home that this meant a female dog, and he was brave enough to actually read the word as a female dog. But and I was a fourth grader, and of course all of us were stunned to hear it at first, but then he kind of talked us through it. And it was a great way to learn context for things like this. No, this is not a word here you should be calling anybody. But here's the context, it's right there on the page, and it makes perfect sense. And for a fourth grade intellect to have to navigate through that, I thought.
And you still remember that?
I do. And this was in small town Utah, for God's sakes, where, you know what I mean, where I heard this. We didn't talk about this, so I've got to say, I'll have to own this one, because if any of my fellow thinkers at the table I don't want to have to put this on them. But I actually wonder, when you were mentioning spelling, Jim, if memorization has been unduly villainized, insofar as it creates other cognitive skills. We're talking about, English, my God, if you know anything about the history of this language, there's certain parts of it that simply have to be memorized because it makes no sense. We have these two parents, Germanic, French, Latin, you know what I mean? They came together in the 11th century. We've tried to make rules for them, but we've got these crazy ass spellings, you know what I mean? And sometimes when my kids or others, well, why is it spelled that way? I simply say because that's how God wants it. Because I don't have a better answer. But I sometimes wonder if sometimes we've gotten so far into villainizing memorization that we forget actually the building block that it can help us. Whether it's learning spelling or other things. I mean, how many of us even know phone numbers since the advent of the telephone? and if you ever get in a pinch, by God, do you wish you'd memorize those numbers? But I think that just in terms of knowing certain rules, whether they're grammatical, whether they're spelling, if sometimes actually emphasizing, resisting the shame of your colleagues and emphasizing memorization can actually pay dividends in other ways that we may not even see.
Well, in early childhood and elementary, we teach sight words. There are some words
Yeah.
that cannot be sounded out.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get Joe and through and
Yeah.
tough
Uh-huh.
out of OUGH? How the heck does that work? And the thing I tell my students to tell their students is English is weird.
Yeah.
You know, dough and through and rough are all spelled with the same 4 letters at the end. We don't know why.
Yeah.
They just are.
And what we know about brain-based learning is that most words are learned in the brain automatic to be without, you don't sound them out, you just learn them. And you have to learn them that way at an
Yeah.
automatic level, which requires rehearsal. Now I'm talking learning theory, which requires mastery. And so until you get to the mastery and then rehearse it a sufficient amount of time, you don't get to the automatic where you automatically recognize the word.
Yeah.
And those principles have to be built into effective instruction. So you're absolutely right. And what she was talking about in terms of reading to the students, that's modeling. One of the most powerful learning methods that exists is modeling. That's what the kids learn from first, very straight from birth. They learn how to do things because they see them being done. And so if we're reading to the kids with the proper dancing in the aisle and with the proper
Expression, yes.
that's
Yeah.
modeling information. So it's great. I love this. Go ahead.
Very similar to what everyone else said, one thing that really stood out in my mind is that we talked about just culturally responsive teaching and understanding where our students come from when they come into our classrooms and identifying those strengths that different cultures and different ethnic backgrounds bring to the classroom. We sometimes have this perception that this is the way we do it here in America is the way we should do it everywhere, and that's not always the case because every group brings a different perspective as well as different strengths. And so meeting students where they are, meeting families where they are, and then building on those strengths are going to be vitally important. It gets back to the positivity and focusing on that. We also brought up, familiar with what's going on in Tennessee, you've got the Reading 360 program that's happening across the state, and one of the areas of focus is high quality materials and understanding where to identify those high quality materials in order to implement them in our school system. I mean, curriculum, we rely on curriculum and what's taught. And so there are places, What Works Clearinghouse has been around for years when it comes to literacy instruction as far as research best practices and identifying that. I will take a minute, and this is just my personal opinion. This is nothing that this table has said, and I'm listening to all of this and I think being in my role as the director of School of Ed, I hear things across the state, which allows me to be somewhat cynical sometimes because I get into the political world that we're in. And you hear things such as the behind closed door politic deals that are done with curriculum companies that's affiliated with the state commissioner, that's all of these things. And so I'm constantly reminded when I listen to people oftentimes in charge is that they have forgotten what their job is, and that's to take care of these children. And our children have got to be our first priority. Our children have got to be what's best for them. And it's not about money. It's not about politics. It's about what's best. And so, something that we haven't even discussed, and I really thought about it after I got here, is all the legislative bills that are coming across the table. This session, they had the special literacy session that just came about, significant changes that are coming into play. Everyone wants to do their best, they just don't know how. I feel like there's not a silver bullet, there's not one piece of material, there's not one strategy that works, and it's got to be researched, it's got to be evaluated, and it has to be reviewed from a very objective point of view, and it can't be skewed in any way, in my opinion, based on politics or money. But that's hard. It's hard for them to do and easy for me to sit here and say.